I was reborn at 18. Not a miracle but post-traumatic stress disorder. A scene replaying itself over and over in my mind. In that eternal moment, I am forever standing in the study of my father, Richard Vance's penthouse apartment on Park Avenue in Manhattan. Outside the window were the undying lights of New York City, but inside, the air was as cold as a tomb. My father had just finished a conference call about a cross-border acquisition. He was still wearing his expensive, bespoke Savile Row suit, an unlit cigar pinched between his fingertips. He sat behind a massive mahogany desk like a king about to pass judgment, looking at me with those gray eyes of his that always seemed to hold a gentle smile. "Eleanor," he began, his voice as steady as ever, carrying an authority that permitted no argument. "Your mother's condition has been less than ideal lately. I've laid out two paths for you." He pushed a document across the desk toward me, the smooth paper giving off the scent of expensive ink. Option 1. Stay in New York and accompany her through this difficult period. Option 2. Go to California. I've prepared a $50 million trust fund for you. You can use it for whatever you want: school, starting a business, or traveling the world. In the echoes of countless nightmares, I had chosen the former. I'd cried and screamed like an abandoned child. "I just want my mom." I thought it was a victory for filial love. How laughable. After that, I watched as Richard brazenly moved his mistress, that brilliant Chinese-American executive Sophia Chan, and their twins, a boy and a girl, into our Long Island estate. The four of them picnicked on the lawn and played by the pool. The heartwarming photos, left on a tablet he'd accidentally forgotten at home, were like daggers plunged with precision into my mother Isabella's heart. Isabella, the woman once known in New York society for her elegance and resilience, withered quickly under the daily barrage of cold indifference and psychological torment. She spent her entire dowry hiring the best lawyers to fight for a decent divorce, only to be utterly defeated by Richard's carefully laid legal traps. In the end, she left with nothing but a body racked with illness and her dignity in tatters. And I, the daughter who had chosen family, became the laughingstock of our circle. They called me the Vance family's discarded pawn, a fool who didn't know which way the wind was blowing. I was exiled to a remote boarding school, my allowance cut so drastically I could barely scrape by. After graduation, I washed dishes in cheap restaurants in a foreign country and handed out flyers on cold winter nights. When the news of my mother's death arrived, I couldn't even scrape together the money for a flight back to New York. It was my friends who crowdfunded the ticket that allowed me to go back and see her cold final form. This time reality and the nightmare overlapped. I was standing at that fateful crossroads once again. The air was thick with the mixed scent of coffee and cigars, and Richard's gaze was placid, as if he were discussing a routine investment, not the fracturing of a family. I didn't cry. I picked up the Montblanc gold pen and in the blank signature line at the end of the document, smoothly wrote my name, Eleanor Vance. Richard's eyebrow arched slightly. It was the first time he had ever truly scrutinized me, a flicker of surprise in his gaze. "Are you sure?" "Perfectly sure." I lifted my chin and looked him straight in the eye, my tone as calm as if I were stating a simple fact. "As your sole legal heir, it's my responsibility to go out and get some experience, to learn how to manage assets." I deliberately stressed the word sole. He paused for 2 seconds, then let out a low chuckle. It held a note of approval, but even more of relief. "As expected of my daughter. You have vision." I smiled too, a smile clearer and colder than his. He thought I'd finally come to my senses, that I'd learned the art of compliance and transaction. He thought that by sending this obstacle far away, he could pave the road for his new family without a second thought, allowing his illegitimate son, the future Leo Vance, to legitimately inherit the Vance capital empire. He had no idea that my signature on this agreement wasn't surrender. It was a declaration of war. That night I returned to my bedroom, a room like a luxury hotel suite, and locked the door. The moonlight spilled coldly onto the velvet carpet. I didn't shed a single tear. I opened my brand new laptop and logged into the newly activated Swiss bank account. On the screen, a long string of numbers lay silent, shimmering with a cold light. I stared at the balance for a full minute, then pulled open a desk drawer and took out a new Moroccan leather notebook. On the first page, I wrote with a fountain pen, "Target, Vance Capital." Phase 1 Wings. Richard's illegitimate children. Leo Vance, Lily Vance. Location, Los Angeles. Sophia Chun, Executive VP of Vance Capital Asia Division. Richard's fixer. Investigate the flow of mothers Isabella's trust assets. Use the $50 million to build an independent investment portfolio and intelligence network. Phase 2 The Return. Within 4 years, return to Wall Street as a challenger. I opened the photo album on my phone. There was a picture of my mother when she was young. She was wearing a beige trench coat, standing among the fallen leaves of Central Park, smiling carefree, like a girl who knew nothing of the world. She later gave that coat to one of the housemates, saying, "The poor girl needs a decent coat to see her boyfriend in." Later, I saw it in a trash can in the backyard, stained with coffee and smeared with muddy footprints. In this life, I will never again believe in anyone's cheap kindness. It's not that I've become heartless. It's that I've finally seen the truth. In this family built on money, no one ever truly loved my mother or me. We were just ornaments on Richard's perfect resume. Accessories labeled family that could be replaced at any time. Starting today, I, Eleanor Vance, will use these $50 million as the first bullet to personally reshuffle the Vance family deck, card by card, back into my own hands. The night I signed the agreement felt like a lifetime. When I came downstairs, the crystal chandelier in the living room was still on, its light brilliant, yet it couldn't reach the shadows in the corners. My mother, Isabella, was sitting in those shadows, wearing a silk robe, her body curled up on the large sofa like a statue on the verge of weathering away. Her eyes were red and swollen, like rose petals drenched by rain. She clutched a silver hair clip I'd used as a child, engraved with my initials, I. When she saw me, her lips parted as if to speak, but all that came out was a nearly inaudible sigh. I said nothing and walked straight back to my room. Closing the door, I shut out her silent sorrow and the surging guilt within me. Lying on the cold silk sheets, I forced myself not to think of her. I mentally recited the list of Wall Street's publicly traded companies from A to Z, trying to banish the flood of emotion with rational symbols. The moon outside my window hung motionless. I knew she, like me, was sleepless. I could hear the faint sounds from her room, the twist of a pill bottle cap, the dull thud of a water glass against the corner of a table, and her suppressed sobs, like the whimpering of a wounded animal. Of course, she didn't know that I had chosen a completely different path, the only one that could possibly lead to victory. What I carried was the bitter lesson she had paid for with her life in a previous existence. At 3 a.m, I slipped quietly downstairs. She was still sitting there, leaning against a velvet throw pillow, her eyes wide open, staring blankly at the intricate plaster molding on the ceiling. I walked over, picked up a cashmere blanket from the arm of the sofa, and gently draped it over her. My touch made her flinch like a startled bird. She turned her head slowly, her gaze filled with confusion and pain. "You're still awake?" Her voice was hoarse, as if scraped by sandpaper. "Prepping my documents for California." I gave the safest possible excuse. She nodded, her gaze fixed on my face, searching carefully, as if trying to find the slightest hint of hesitation or regret in my expression. But there was none. My face was as calm as a mirror, reflecting only the disappointment in her eyes. The light in her eyes faded, bit by bit, like a candle flame blown out by the wind. "Are you blaming me?" she finally asked, her voice trembling. "For being too weak? For not being able to keep your father?" "No." My reply was simple and blunt. She gave a sad smile, tears tracing paths down her well-cared-for cheeks. "Richard didn't give you this money on a whim. He's not sending you off to further your education, Eleanor. He's exiling you." "I know." My composure stunned her even more. She shot upright, a nearly desperate light flickering in her eyes. "Then why did you sign it?" I couldn't answer. How could I explain the bloody future that awaited us? How could I tell her that if we didn't leave now, what we faced was a far more complete and utter destruction? I couldn't say it. It would shatter what little will she had left. She clutched the copy of the agreement, and a tear splashed onto the paper, smudging a small blot of ink. "It's not that I didn't try," she murmured, as if explaining to me, or perhaps hypnotizing herself. "I really did everything I could to hold this family together. But he never intended for me to win. In that moment I wanted so badly to hug her, to tell her that this time, in this life she had me. But I held back. My body felt nailed to the spot, unable to move. I knew that in my past life, it was a fragile hug, just like this, that had pulled me back into an emotional vortex. I was drawn in by her sorrow and ended up sinking with her. She jumped from the balcony, and I couldn't even afford a plane ticket to come see her without working odd jobs and borrowing from friends. This time I absolutely could not afford to be soft. I turned and walked resolutely back up the stairs to my room. At 5 in the morning I heard the door to her room finally close. The world fell completely silent, but I felt no desire to sleep. I opened my laptop and started on the things that truly mattered. Drafting my transfer application to Stanford University, researching the legal documents required for my visa, and drawing up a preliminary investment plan for the $50 million before the freeze period ended. At the same time, I opened an encrypted document containing the Plan B checklist I had compiled from the memories of my past life. The shareholding structure of Vance Capital's offshore companies. Transfer records for several of Richard's undisclosed properties. Key points from several suspicious contracts signed by Sophia Chan through an abuse of her position. A list of changes in the core power structure of Vance Capital over the next few years. At the very top of the list was Leo Vance, age 3, soon to be enrolled in a top-tier exclusive preschool in Los Angeles. I took my mouse cursor and drew 3 heavy circles around the name Leo Vance. The heir. What an ironic title. In my past life, the media had hailed him as the new star of Wall Street, the genius heir to the Vance empire, while selectively forgetting his origins. In this life, if he wants to ascend the throne, he'll have to go through me first. At 7:30 in the morning, my mother was awake. She had put on exquisite makeup, but the heavy foundation couldn't hide her haggard complexion and swollen eyes. I was about to leave to run some errands when she stopped me in the entryway. "Eleanor," she called, her voice tinged with a final plea. "It's not too late to change your mind." I stopped and turned back to look at her. Not this time. I looked her in the eye and said word by word, "I'm going to win a war. And then I'm coming back to bring you home." She stared at me, stunned for a long, long time. Finally, she gave a slow nod. Not another tear fell from her eyes. All she said was, "Then don't you dare lose." I smiled. It was the first genuine smile in my 18 years. One filled with determination and hope. "Don't worry. I won't." I closed the door and walked out into the early New York morning sun. The sky was blue, the air was crisp, and everything was a new beginning. The day I left for the airport, Richard drove me himself. My mother was in the car too, in the front passenger seat, like a silent work of art. She wore heavy, almost theatrical makeup, bright red lipstick, a ghastly pale foundation, as if it were her way of declaring that her status as Mrs. Vance had not yet expired. She stared silently out the window, watching the familiar streets fly backward in a blur, as if bidding farewell to her entire youth. Richard wore a dark gray cashmere sport coat, a perfectly measured smile on his face. To any outsider, he was undoubtedly an impeccable, doting father seeing his beloved daughter off on a long journey. He gripped the steering wheel, expertly maneuvering the Bentley while chatting with me about California universities and the climate. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he glanced at my mother. "I've already made the arrangements. Eleanor will be staying with Sophia. Sophia will take good care of her. With her at Sophia's house, I can rest easy." My mother's body visibly stiffened. Her knuckles, clutching her Hermes handbag, turned white from the force of her grip. Of course she knew who Sophia Chan was. The youngest female partner at Vance Capital, 35 years old. A Stanford MBA, beautiful, intelligent, and more importantly, 3 years ago, she had given birth to Richard's twins, a boy and a girl, in California. Within Vance Capital, some jokingly called her the Crown Princess. It wasn't that my mother didn't know. She had simply chosen to pretend she didn't. Just as she was doing now, still wearing the Chanel suit Richard had given her for their 10th wedding anniversary. Her spine ramrod straight, maintaining the dignity of a wife. Even if that dignity was set to completely crumble the moment the car reached the airport's private tarmac. Richard's assistant was already waiting in the VIP lounge and respectfully took my luggage. My mother grasped my hand. It was cold and trembling. She whispered her last-minute worries. "Did you pack your passport?" Do you have your credit cards? That cashmere scarf you love so much. I nodded, watching her eyes redden at the rims. She tried to force a smile, but the corners of her mouth turned down uncontrollably. Her voice choked. If you have trouble adjusting over there, call me. I'll send you things. My own eyes began to burn, but I forced back the tears. This wasn't a final goodbye. It was the prelude to war. Richard stepped forward and with a gesture of utmost tenderness, pulled my mother into his arms. Then he smiled at me. Your mother just loves to worry. She hasn't slept well these past few days thinking about you. For a moment, a dazed look crossed my mother's eyes. Her own eyes actually welled up at his false embrace, as if she were once again experiencing the illusion of being loved. I looked at her, my heart aching with a mixture of anger and pain. This was her. Even after being torn to shreds, she could still find a fleeting moment of warmth and solace in a scrap of false affection he deigned to give her. I stood up and walked toward the boarding gate. As I passed my mother, she suddenly pulled me into a tight hug. Eleanor. Her face was buried in the crook of my neck, her voice trembling uncontrollably. If anyone wrongs you out there, you come home. Mommy will always be here. I gently patted her back and whispered in her ear, in a voice only we could hear. Mom, wait for me. Wait for what? Wait for me to come back and take back everything that belongs to you. Her body jolted. A flicker of disbelief shone in her eyes, and then she nodded forcefully. Okay. Mom will wait for you. When I looked back, Richard still had his arm around her, looking for all the world like a loving couple seeing their daughter off on her journey. Only I knew that locked away in his office was a photo of him, Sophia, and their twins at Disneyland, their smiles brighter than in any of our family portraits. Only I knew that this entire facade of tender affection was merely laying the groundwork for him to one day transfer the entire family fortune to those illegitimate children. I stepped into the cabin of the private jet, where Sophia Chun was waiting for me on a comfortable leather sofa. She wore a sharply tailored camel trench coat. Her makeup was flawless, her lipstick a subtle dusty rose, and a pair of discreet but brilliant diamond studs adorned her ears. She radiated the confidence and poise of a successful professional woman. She stood up, smiling, and extended a hand to me. Eleanor, it's a pleasure to see you again. Richard has told me so much about you. He says you're a very bright and independent girl. I didn't shake her hand, only gave a slight nod. Thank you for your trouble, Miss Chun. She didn't seem to mind my coldness, retracting her hand smoothly and picking up her purse. Don't be so formal. From now on in California, think of me as family. If you need anything at all, just let me know. I tugged at the corner of my mouth in something of a reply. She thought I didn't know who she was. In my past life, I lived in her Beverly Hills mansion for 4 years. I knew which drawer held the children's birth certificates, and which safe hid the documents for her joint account with Richard. I knew what time late at night she liked to call Richard to complain about my mother's stubbornness. She thought I was still that naive weak girl who could be so easily manipulated. She had no idea that I had come back this time to collect a blood debt. The plane took off smoothly. As soon as I was seated, I swapped in a new SIM card and enabled all cloud syncing and location services. In the background, several inconspicuous finance apps began running silently, receiving encrypted messages from all over the world. I knew that my departure meant a final farewell to my identity as the eldest daughter of the Vance family. Richard and Sophia could now groom their heirs in peace. But they would soon discover that I was not an exiled princess. I was a returning goddess of vengeance. It was 6 in the morning when the plane landed in Los Angeles. The sky was just beginning to lighten, and the air carried a hint of dampness from the ocean. I followed Sophia out of the airport, pulling my suitcase behind me. Her steps were light and her smile was gentle. She played the part of a warm and attentive guardian to perfection. Eleanor, did you sleep well on the plane last night? Let's get something to eat first. Would you prefer a Chinese or American breakfast? She asked kindly, as if we were family who had known each other for years. I replied coolly, either is fine. Thank you, Sophia. I didn't call her auntie, but used her first name. A subtle way of drawing a line between us. A flicker of surprise, almost imperceptible, crossed her eyes, but she quickly returned to normal. She didn't know that Sophia was a name I had only dared to utter in my past life after suppressing countless humiliations. And in this life it was my first signal to declare our equality. Her car was a black Range Rover. The interior was spotless, and in the trunk, she even had a new set of toiletries, school materials, and a detailed guide to life in Los Angeles waiting for me. Once I was inside and the door was shut, the noise of the outside world was sealed away. As she drove, Sophia chattered on, asking what style of room I liked, whether I needed a private tutor, and if I was interested in sports like equestrianism or tennis. Her words were flawless, every sentence crafted to sound like she was thinking of my well-being. But I didn't believe a single word. She said, "Make yourself at home here." But her real home life was unfolding in a Beverly Hills mansion. Her fraternal twins were likely asleep in their nursery at that very moment. A room filled with expensive educational toys and custom-made storybooks. Those two children had been Sophia's surprise for Richard on his 45th birthday. They were only 3 years old now, carefully shielded from view. They never appeared on any social media, and my mother certainly didn't know they existed. Sophia was an extremely clever woman. She knew Richard's divorce wasn't finalized, and she knew my mother still held a portion of the voting rights on the board. So she kept herself and her children well hidden, hiding her ambition, and hiding her desire for her son to inherit all of Vance Capital. And I was just a pawn she was using to placate my mother. "Richard says you're a very mature and sensible girl, not like those spoiled rich girls," she said with a smile, sizing me up in the rearview mirror. "Honestly, he thinks very highly of you." I played along with a small smile. "Is that so? I never knew." She paused, then continued in a softer tone. "Don't overthink it. Your father just isn't good at expressing his feelings. Men always focus on their careers. Just focus on your studies for now. Once he's settled things in New York, you'll get everything your due. After all, you're his only daughter." I nodded and lowered my gaze, my nails digging deep into my palm. "Thank you, Sophia. I'll do my best." Her expression relaxed, seemingly very pleased with my obedient attitude. In my last life, I was just as obedient. I lived in her house for 4 years like a transparent shadow. Every year, she would throw a birthday party for me, inviting the children of her business partners. Her son Leo was always among them. The boy's features were the spitting image of Richard's. At 3 years old, he could politely call me Sister Eleanor, but the look in his eyes held no warmth, only scrutiny and distance. Meanwhile, my mother had been diagnosed with severe depression, left all alone in an empty house in New York, repeating my name over and over. In this life, I would no longer be the obedient child who let others pull her strings. But on the surface, I would play the part better than anyone. Sophia's house was decorated like a showroom from a high-end interior design magazine. Minimalist, expensive, and sterile. She put me in a guest room on the second floor, which overlooked a turquoise pool. Everything in the room was brand new. There was even a handwritten welcome card on the nightstand, signed, "Love, Sophia." A long premeditated display of warmth. When I came out of the shower, she had already laid out all the materials I needed for school registration tomorrow. "Get some rest and adjust to the time difference. I'll take you to school tomorrow. It's always good to have someone with you on the first day," she said softly, standing at the door. I nodded. "Okay, thank you." She left satisfied. At 11 p.m., all the lights in the house went out. I sat at the desk and opened my laptop. The cold light from the screen illuminated my face. I wasn't looking at the school materials. I was synchronizing the fragmented memories of my past life with my plan of action for this one. I stared at the complex chart of Vance Capital's ownership structure on the screen until the moon was high in the sky and the night was as black as ink. In this life, I didn't come here to live under someone else's roof. I came to take back my throne. The next morning at 6:30, Sophia knocked on my door right on time. I'd been awake for a while. "Eleanor, time to get up. Breakfast is ready." Her voice came through the door, as gentle as if she were calling to her own child. I quickly got myself ready and opened the door. "Good morning, Sophia." She seemed a little surprised by my punctuality and composure, but she smiled nonetheless. "What a good girl. Come downstairs for breakfast. I'll take you to Stanford to complete your enrollment in a little while." An exquisite breakfast was laid out on the table. Avocado toast, smoked salmon, Greek yogurt, and fresh berries. Just as I sat down, A little girl in a pink princess dress came running from the other side of the living room and threw herself into Sophia's arms. "Mommy, I want a hug," she said in a sugary sweet voice. I looked over and saw that the little girl was Lily. She had soft, curly blonde hair and a pair of gray eyes that were strikingly similar to Richard's. When she saw me, she immediately fell silent, studying me with curiosity before asking in a small voice, "Who is she?" Sophia stroked her hair and introduced me softly. "This is your big sister, Eleanor." "Sister?" Lily tilted her head, looking back at me, her eyes filled with confusion. "Why doesn't she look like me?" I smiled and answered in fluent English, "Because my mommy and daddy are different from yours." She nodded, seeming to half understand. Only I caught the flicker of awkwardness and displeasure that flashed in Sophia's eyes. Just then, a little boy also came down the stairs. He was wearing a blue polo shirt and clutching a transformer. That was Leo. He didn't say a word, just stood a few feet away, watching me with a wary gaze that was beyond his years. I smiled at him. "Good morning, Leo." He didn't respond, only hugged the toy in his arms tighter. Sophia explained a bit awkwardly, "They're a little shy around new people. Don't mind them." "It's okay, they're still young," I said with a smile, then lowered my head and elegantly cut into my toast with a fork, hiding the coldness in my eyes. Sophia, however, was completely unabashed, letting the two children call her mommy directly. Perhaps she really thought I was naive enough to believe her ridiculous story about how the children's father works abroad year-round. In my last life I was just like this, playing the role of the superfluous sister, in the warm atmosphere of their family of 3. In 4 years I went from being a sister in name only to an irrelevant guest and finally not even a guest. My student visa inexplicably ran into problems, and when I applied to return to my home country, I had to get Sophia's approval. Not this time. In this life I would make them personally seal their own fates. Before Sophia drove me to school, she made a point of having the children say goodbye to me. "Say goodbye to sister." "Bye-bye, sister," Lily waved sweetly. Leo remained silent, just letting out a sullen grunt. I looked back at them and nodded with a smile. "Goodbye, sweethearts." I said sweethearts for them, and also for Sophia. I knew she was smart and perceptive. She would analyze my every look, my every word. So I had to play the part of someone even more harmless than she imagined. On the Stanford campus, she carried my bag for me, chattering like a true elder. "The coursework here is very demanding. You need to make sure you rest. The climate in California is dry. Remember to drink more water. If you need anything, call me anytime." I looked at her gentle profile, thinking, she really is a natural-born actress. I pretended to listen intently. "I will, Sophia. Thank you." She nodded in satisfaction. The last thing she said before I walked into the new student registration office was almost a whisper in my ear. "Eleanor, remember, here no one can help you. You can only rely on yourself." I stopped, turned around and gave her a brilliant smile. "Yes, I understand." With my backpack on, I walked into the sun-drenched campus. Ahead of me were new classes, unfamiliar classmates, and the enormous web of revenge I was about to weave with my own hands. I felt no fear. Because I wasn't here to seek shelter. I was here to plant landmines. That afternoon, I didn't go back to Sophia's house. Instead, I went to a coffee shop near the school to meet someone I had already contacted through encrypted email. A PhD student at the business school who had once interned at the North American branch of Vance Capital. "Are you sure there were issues with the books on Vance Capital's acquisition of that Silicon Valley startup last year?" I asked in a low voice, sliding a latte across the table to him. He nodded, his eyes darting around. "I can't be certain, but my boss at the time had me process several large but vaguely itemized invoices. The money was funneled to an offshore account. I didn't dare ask whose it was. I took a business card out of my bag and handed it to him. It was from a partner at a top executive search firm, the very company he dreamed of working for. "I know which investment bank you want to work for after you graduate, and I know who your recommendation will come from. How much you tell me today will determine how far you go in the future." His face turned pale. Who are you?" "I am Richard Vance's daughter," I said clearly, word for word. "The legitimate, the one and only daughter of Isabella Vance." He no longer hesitated. He slid an encrypted USB drive across the table to me. On it was the raw data from those questionable financial statements he had secretly backed up. I took the drive and smiled at him. In this life I would no longer be the good, obedient girl. Nor would I be slow to act. I will use every rule of the game they taught me to take them down one by one completely. When I go home, I will make sure Richard Vance, Sophia Chun, and their two precious children know. I am not the pawn they exiled to California. I am the deadliest hunter they personally raised. During my 4 years at Stanford, I lived like a finely tuned machine. In addition to my double major in finance and law, I used that $50 million in seed money to secretly register a small investment advisory firm called Phoenix Consulting. On the surface, Sophia's care for me was impeccable. She hired the best tutors for me, encouraged me to attend all sorts of high society events, and would even affectionately introduce me to her friends at Thanksgiving parties. This is Richard's daughter, Eleanor, the future heiress of our family. She thought I was under her control, steadily advancing along the airhead socialite path she designed, all to clear the way for her son Leo. What she didn't know was that while I studied the theories of capital management in my classes by day, by night I was in the Phoenix Consulting office, putting it all into practice with real money. I invested in obscure tech startups and acquired small near-bankrupt companies with immense potential. Every move was precise and covert. More natural than Sophia's performance were the fraternal twins. As they got older, they came to see me as an indispensable big sister in their lives. Lily would run to my room at bedtime, storybook in hand, insisting I read her a chapter before she slept. Leo's first thought when he couldn't assemble his beloved model robots was to ask me for help. Their dependence on me was pure and real, twining around me like vines. I knew this dependence didn't stem from the love of kinship, but from a childish possessiveness. They didn't know who I really was, or that a gaping chasm separated us. And they certainly didn't know that once they were grown, Sophia would tear this familial bond to shreds with her own hands, ruthlessly shoving me from my position as big sister. But for now I was in no hurry. The more they depended on me, the more profound the pain of their future betrayal would be. I painted with them, took them to Disneyland, taught them piano. In their eyes I was the best, kindest sister in the world. At school they would proudly tell their friends, "My sister is a top student at Stanford. She knows everything." I would always smile, pat their heads and say softly, "Of course. Your big sister will always protect you." I wasn't lying. I will protect them, until they learn how their mother destroyed mine. In my junior year, I was curled up on my dorm room sofa analyzing a financial report when a business talk show on CNBC came on. A familiar logo flashed across the screen, and the host said in an enthusiastic tone, "Tonight, we are deeply honored to have with us the chairman of Vance Capital, Mr. Richard Vance." The camera zoomed in, and my father appeared on the screen. He was in his usual impeccable suit, his smile refined as he spoke eloquently for the camera. The host asked with a smile, "Mr. Vance, we all know you have a very accomplished daughter, Miss Eleanor. We hear she's currently a student at Stanford." Richard nodded, his smile unwavering. "Yes, she is my only child." The host joked, "Oh, that must be a lot of pressure for Miss Eleanor, having to inherit such a vast business empire all on her own in the future." For a split second, Richard's smile stiffened almost imperceptibly. "Yes. But I have faith in her abilities." I sat up straight, staring at the familiar face on the screen, the corner of my mouth curling into a cold smirk. This was Richard Vance. To the public, he was always the perfect father, the perfect husband, the perfect business leader. But I saw the flicker of guilt and hesitation in his eyes. He wasn't worried that I couldn't inherit it all alone. He was resentful, hating that he couldn't announce to the world, "Actually, I also have a son. He is the true heir to the Vance empire." I turned off the TV and sat in the darkness for a long time, until my phone screen lit up with a notification for an encrypted email. The Vance Capital quarterly board meeting is about to begin online. I clicked the link and entered the observer access password known only to a select few. On the screen were contracts for overseas acquisitions, earnout agreements, and cash flow reports. I glanced at the list of attending executives, and the curve of my lips deepened. Sophia Chin's name was right there on the list. Her title had been upgraded to Executive Director of the Global Strategic Development Department, making her one of the key decision-makers for this overseas acquisition plan. Everything was unfolding exactly as it had in my past life, down to the last detail. She was climbing the ladder, step by step, pacifying me with false affection while conquering territory for herself and her son within Richard's empire. And on my end, I methodically hit the screen record button, saving the entire meeting, including the arguments and compromises that would never make it into the official minutes, to my private server. Among the documents was an internal asset valuation report she had submitted, signed by her own hand, recommending that the long-diluted, nominal shares held in my mother's name be liquidated as a lingering historical issue. I smiled. She was acting. And so was I. Except our scripts were completely different. She thought I was a canary in a gilded cage, that as long as she provided a lavish enough enclosure and fine enough food, I would forget about the sky. But she didn't know that I was waiting for the moment she flew highest, when she was at her most complacent, to break her wings with my own 2 hands. 2 in the morning. I was sitting in the office of Phoenix Consulting. Outside the window were the sleepless lights of Silicon Valley. On the last page of my notebook I wrote a single line. Eleanor Vance, age 22. The ghost of Vance Capital, founder of Phoenix Consulting. Asset reclamation. Countdown initiated. 4 years passed in the blink of an eye. The Los Angeles sun was still brilliant, but I knew it was time for me to leave. I didn't invite Richard to my Stanford graduation. Instead, I sent my mother a first-class plane ticket. She arrived alone, wearing a royal blue silk dress. She looked much healthier than she had 4 years ago. The fine lines at the corners of her eyes had softened, and the deep-seated sorrow that once clouded her brow was gone. She stood at a distance from the crowd, a gentle smile on her face as she watched me receive summa cum laude honors, though her eyes glistened with tears. I walked over to her. She took my hand, her voice trembling slightly. "Eleanor, you've gotten so thin." I smiled and squeezed her hand back. "I'm fine, Mom. I've already received offers from several top investment banks. I'm planning to move back to New York." "You have nothing to worry about, ma'am. The young lady is quite formidable now." The person who came to pick us up was Sophia. She sat in the passenger seat, her smile perfectly pleasant, her tone as light and easy as that of a non-threatening friend. I've really admired her hard work these past few years. My mother gave her a polite but distant nod. "Thank you for everything these past few years." "Oh, please don't say that. I think of Eleanor as half a daughter." As Sophia said those words, I clearly saw a flicker of pain in my mother's eyes. Her grip on my hand tightened instinctively. I knew she understood everything. She was just still waiting for a man who would never come back to her. But I didn't give her the chance to dwell on it. I knew that once she sank into the mire of memory, she'd be trapped by the past all over again. The night before I left California, the 2 children knocked on my door. "Sister." It was Lily. She was 7 years old, wearing a pink nightgown, her eyes red-rimmed. Behind her was Leo in blue pajamas, clutching a Lego model. "What are you 2 doing here?" I let them in, feigning surprise. "Are you really going back to New York?" Lily threw herself into my arms, her voice thick with tears. "You promised you'd be here to watch me grow up." "You're a liar," Leo pouted, accusing me like a little adult. "Dad never said you were going back." "I'm going back for work, not for good," I said, patting their heads, though my heart was a block of ice. "Then, can you video call us every day?" Lily looked up at me with huge, tear-filled eyes. They were the spitting image of Richard's. I hugged her gently. "Of course. I'll miss you both every day." They were still so young. Innocent, sweet, and dependent on me. So much so that for a moment, I almost forgot they were the product of Sophia and Richard's ambition. The next day at the airport, Sophia gave me a perfunctory hug. "Eleanor, once your father has things arranged in New York, it'll be time for you to officially join the group. After all, you're his only daughter." "Of course," I nodded obediently. "I'll follow his arrangements. With you gone, I don't know how long Leo and Lily will be heartbroken." She sighed, playing the part of a loving mother. "Sophia," I interrupted her, my gaze utterly sincere. "They need their mother's company. And New York needs me." She was taken aback for a second, then smiled. "All right then. The choice is yours." I picked up my suitcase and walked through the airport doors just as the sky was beginning to lighten. I knew this step was both a homecoming and a declaration of war. I wasn't the obedient daughter Richard planned for, nor was I the live-in sister under Sophia's roof. I am Eleanor Vance, Isabella's daughter, the true heir to Vance Capital, and I was back to take back everything that was mine. The first thing I did when I got back to New York wasn't to see Richard, but to go to the New York office of Phoenix Consulting. The second was to send out letters of intent for partnership to every top financial institution on Wall Street, under the name of the founder of Phoenix Consulting. No one knew my background. All they knew was that a young woman named Eleanor had suddenly appeared on Wall Street, mysterious, low-key, but possessing astonishing capital and a precise eye for investment. I didn't want a position handed to me by Richard. I would dismantle his empire's foundations, step by step from the outside. Because I knew that the one who could truly control Vance Capital would never be a princess waiting for fate to smile upon her. The plane cut across the sky and landed at JFK International Airport. Images flashed through my mind: my mother's proud tears at my graduation, the sorrowful looks in Leo and Lily's eyes, and Richard's unequivocal declaration in that financial interview: "Yes, I have only this one daughter." I smiled softly. Yes, just the one. And this time, I was going to make him pay the heaviest price for his one and only. I was 22 the year I returned to New York. Richard threw a grand welcome party for me at his Long Island estate, just as he had when he sent me away, all smiles and suave charm. Behind him stood the top executives of Vance Capital. Their gazes were a mixture of scrutiny, curiosity, and a barely perceptible trace of contempt. "Eleanor, welcome home," he said. "Thank you," I replied with a smile. "Father." He patted my shoulder, satisfied. "I've already made arrangements for you. You'll start in the group's overseas investment division. Work your way up step by step. One day, all of this will be yours." I nodded. "Thank you for the arrangements, Mr. Vance." His hand paused, and the smile on his face froze for an instant. I knew he understood. For me, the time for calling him father was over. But he still needed me, needed my status as the legitimate heir, to placate the old guard on the board who were loyal to my mother's family, and to burnish the image of Vance Capital. And so, I re-entered Vance Capital, an outsider in my own right. The first year, I did the most basic work in the investment division, analyzing markets, writing reports, and pulling all-nighters to build project models. I never played the part of the heiress, always acting humble, professional, and efficient. I quickly earned the respect of some of my colleagues. The second year, I was transferred to the Strategic Development Department, the same department Sophia once led. I began to get involved in the group's core projects, shadowing Richard and attending all sorts of important business negotiations. Like a sponge, I frantically absorbed every piece of information about this empire. At the same time, I quietly converted the intelligence gathered in secret by Phoenix Consulting into leverage for myself at Vance Capital. He began to truly trust me. The third year, at my insistence, my mother finally moved out of the estate that held half a lifetime of her pain, and into a penthouse apartment I bought for her on Central Park West. She started taking oil painting classes and attending charity events. She became serene and radiant. But only I knew that whenever she saw photos in the news of Richard and Sophia attending events together, her fingertips would still tremble uncontrollably. "I'm fine," she would always tell me. "You don't need to worry about me." I would nod. "I'm not worried. I just remember everything." That winter, Sophia brought an 11-year-old Leo and Lily back to New York, the reason being that the children needed a more systematic elite education. They were enrolled in the most exclusive private school in all of New York. I personally selected gifts and went to Richard's apartment to visit them. "Big sister." The two children threw themselves into my arms when they saw me, just like when they were little. Their features were already the spitting image of Richard's. "Have you been good? Did you miss me?" I crouched down with a smile and handed them the beautifully wrapped gifts. "We did. We missed you every day. Our teacher told us to write about the person I admire most. And I wrote about you." Sophia stood to one side, watching us with a beaming smile. "Look how attached they are to you." I smiled back. "They're both smart children." I reached out and stroked their soft hair. but the warmth in my eyes was freezing over inch by inch. They were still young, too young to understand what their status as illegitimate children meant. But I understood. That night I called my mother. Mom, let me hire you a couple of new bodyguards. New York isn't very safe lately. Are you afraid something will happen to me, or are you afraid of what I might do? My mother asked sharply from the other end of the line. Neither, I said after a pause, my voice low. I'm afraid you'll steal my scene. There was a moment of silence on the other end, followed by a soft chuckle. Eleanor, you've really grown up. In the 6 years since my return to New York, I went from a departmental assistant to a project manager, then to the youngest vice president. Finally, just before Richard was preparing for a new round of succession, I successfully secured a position in the office of the board of directors, becoming the youngest member in the very heart of Vance Capital's power structure. I knew Richard was wary of me, but he was too arrogant and too busy. He was busy pushing Vance Capital's market value to new heights, busy paving the way for Sophia and his precious son, so busy that he failed to notice when the seed he himself had planted had grown into a tangled web of roots beneath the foundations of his empire. I never made a show of it, but every faction within Vance Capital knew one thing clearly. Legally, Richard Vance had only one child. Meanwhile, through several media outlets controlled by Phoenix Consulting, I spared no effort in crafting a public image for Richard as the perfect entrepreneur and devoted husband. This public opinion was like an invisible net, trapping him firmly on his moral high ground. Even if he wanted to, he wouldn't dare publicly acknowledge the existence of his illegitimate children. And all of this was a magnificent trap I had meticulously set for him. On my 28th birthday, Richard Vance collapsed. Fate's retribution always arrives with such precision and irony. A massive heart attack, just 10 minutes before a board meeting, where he was set to announce the new succession plan for the corporation. He was rushed into an ambulance, and the media reported it as exhaustion from overwork. But the moment he entered the operating room, a tidal wave of chaos swept through Vance Capital. I arrived at the hospital with my legal team and the audit group from Phoenix Consulting. Sophia was waiting outside the intensive care unit, her makeup perfect, but her eyes filled with anxiety and fear. "You're the person Richard trusts most right now," she said when she saw me, grabbing onto me like I was a lifeline. "Those old guys on the board are in disarray without a leader. You have to step up and stabilize the situation." I smiled and handed her a blue folder. "Sophia, I'm here to do exactly that. My plan is in here." She took the folder, puzzled, and began flipping through the pages. The first page was a temporary letter of authorization signed by over half of the core directors, granting me acting authority as chairman. All it was missing was her signature as executive director. The second page was a proposal to restructure Vance Capital's existing share ownership, aimed at cleaning up the nominee shares with their ambiguous rights and responsibilities. The third page was a copy of an anonymous whistleblower letter, attached with detailed bank records and proof of asset transfers. The letter alleged that Chairman Richard Vance, during the course of his marriage, had embezzled over $260 million in corporate funds to purchase real estate and establish trust funds for a specific, non-affiliated individual, Sophia Chun, and her children. Sophia's hands began to tremble violently. "Eleanor, you?" She snapped her head up, her eyes blazing with shock and fury. "What do you think you're doing?" My smile remained gentle. "Haven't you always told people that I'm the sole heir to the Vance family? I'm just here to take back what's mine. You're betraying your father. I'm not the one who betrayed him. He's the one who sold me off 18 years ago." My voice was quiet, but it pierced her heart like an icicle. "I'm just picking up the knife he handed me." Sophia stood up, her face as white as a sheet. "You won't get away with this. When Richard wakes up, he'll never let you do this." "He's already signed a memorandum for his will," I said, taking another document from my lawyer. "It includes arrangements for the custody of your children, and the designated transitional authority for the chairman's position in case of an emergency." She froze as if struck by lightning. "That's impossible. How did you get this?" "Because I helped him draft it." "You're lying." "Sophia," I laughed softly. "Have you forgotten? I've worked by his side for 6 whole years. And you, for most of those 6 years, have been busy in New York social circles, paving the way for your children." She collapsed back into her chair, utterly defeated. She finally realized that what she thought of as her control and strategy was nothing more than a childish game of house in my eyes. She thought I was waiting for Richard's charity and approval, but in reality I was waiting for her children to be old enough to understand the meaning of the words "to have nothing," and waiting for this very moment when Richard would fall. The emergency board meeting was held as scheduled. I stood at the head of the conference table, my team behind me. Sophia's seat was empty. Richard was still lying in the ICU. And as for the twins, they had been temporarily escorted from their private school by my people before the meeting, under the guise of protection. One of the old guard raised an objection. "She's just a daughter. The chairman isn't dead yet." I scanned the room and said only one thing. "I am Eleanor Vance, the sole legal heir of Richard Vance. For the past 6 years, every important document, every financial audit, every merger and acquisition negotiation at Vance Capital has borne my signature. Today I am not staging a coup. I am simply exercising my legal rights." The boardroom fell silent. A week later, Richard woke up. He'd lost a lot of weight. Staring at me standing by his bed, he asked in a hoarse voice, When did you start planning this?" "The day you told me, go to California, I'll give you 50 million. He was stunned, his clouded eyes filled with regret and confusion. "Don't you hate me?" he asked. I did. "But now I no longer have time for hate," I said. "Father, you're the one who raised a wolf. You can't complain now that it's bitten you." He closed his eyes, his fingers trembling as he reached for the call button by his bed. But I had already turned and walked away, without a single look back. In that moment I thought I heard him use the last of his strength to whisper my name. "Eleanor." I didn't stop. That winter, on the official Vance Capital website, the chairman's portrait was replaced for the first time with the face of a woman, a calm young woman with clear eyes as sharp as a blade. Her name was Eleanor Vance. It took her 10 years to transform herself from a desperate girl exiled by her father into Wall Street's most formidable new queen. She didn't win back her father's love, but she won back her mother's dignity, and for herself, she won the entire world. I stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows on the top floor of the Vance Capital building, gazing down at the jungle of steel and glass below. A video call came in from Los Angeles. On the screen were Leo and Lily, now 12 years old. "Sister, Mom's been crying for days. She said you don't want us anymore." I paused for a moment, looking at the faces that shared half my blood. Then, in a voice softer than I had ever used before, I said, "Don't worry. I'm always here."